Now, I know I'm speaking to a very educated and knowledgeable audience, and so I'm not going to get very technical in my sharing, but I will share my stories, the mistakes I made, and the lessons I've learned as a fellow marketer. So today I'll be sharing 3 lessons I've learned around this topic of KPIs. I'll start with a famous quote from Peter Drucker that you see here, what gets measured gets managed. But the reality is that not everything that matters can be measured, and not everything that we measure matters. And the key word here is matters. Let me tell you a story. One of my KPIs right now is to increase the marketing qualified leads by 20% year on year in our focus accounts in our priority markets by the end of this year. Problem is, I have a tiny, tiny budget, okay? And as I said, we're new in our journey here in Apex, so I don't have a ton of resources, almost like a startup, and I didn't really have any baseline data to work with. And honestly, I could have put all my money in digital ads and events, and I think I would have hit my numbers with little effort and no fuss. But I knew we had to make an impression to have market impact, and I had to get creative and do more with the little that I have. So amongst many other things I did, one of them was a pillar research piece that we did with an influential financial services analyst firm. And I changed the way we approach our content and creative assets to be more interactive. I tried to localize it as much as I could to make it meaningful for each individual market. But most importantly, I tried my best to create an end-to-end multi-channel campaign that would stretch the entire year in phases instead of piecemeal efforts, which is typically what you would get in a smaller company with limited resources. And that project took me a good 3 to 4 months. What's interesting was when COVID-19 hit, digital ads became incredibly expensive. My cost per lead skyrocketed. And on top of that, like many of us here, we couldn't do any physical face-to-face events. But I could still hold my numbers steady because I kept this research pillar piece and campaign around it. And it was perfect timing because everyone was moving to digital banking, which is, our sweet spot. Everyone wanted to see a research piece that had an outlook about the future with numbers and statistics. And most people were stuck at home and ready to consume this kind of content. And amazingly, my marketing qualified leads skyrocketed and was even higher than the numbers I had before the pandemic. And the majority of what became my sales acceptance leads were organic leads through my inbound marketing and end-to-end campaign efforts, not my paid targeted ads. And as a result, I was actually able to get additional budget, not a lot, but enough. And I was happy. And the funny thing was when I asked my management, what was it, about it that made you want to invest further this year? And it wasn't so much the numbers. It was the visual pieces, the tier 1 media brand mentions, the business influencers and the bankers in their network that were talking about the research piece. So what is the lesson here? I think it's really important to go beyond tactics that are easy to deliver, especially digital ads. I know it, I do it myself. They give you a sense of immediacy, the short-term effect. But if I had just stuck to digital ads and events with no other backup or plans, I would have failed. So you have to invest time and energy in some of these more strategic, creative content pieces and finding the right influences that go beyond a one-off experience or a one-off event. We live in a very noisy and saturated market right now. And I know it requires more effort. It will take longer to create if you don't have a lot of resources like myself. You have to get really creative, but it does help you in the long run. Your results are much more lasting and it will keep you afloat, especially during a crisis. And that ultimately elevates the way your management views you beyond the KPIs and the numbers. So next slide, RP. Now, leading and lagging indicators are something I look at all the time. My leading indicators will often tell me if I'm on track to meet my lagging indicator. In this case, I'm just sharing one example of my lagging indicator, which is my active opportunity pipeline for sales. And what comes with it is the forecasted annual recurring revenue. Now, because the sales process for B2B is typically very long, right? It can be 12 months, more than that. So I tend to focus more on my leading indicators. There are many indicators to look at, but I'll touch on the main ones that I always keep an eye on every month. It helps me to know the likelihood of whether, the chances of hitting a healthy sales opportunity pipeline. So RP, you can click through everything, it's fine. I look at my website traffic volume and conversion rate. I look at the prospect counts, new contacts, and my cost per lead to make sure I'm not spending more than I have to and that I'm on track budget-wise. And I also look at my conversion rate from MQLs to sales acceptance leads. And it tells me the quality of my leads and whether my sales are accepting them and addressing them fast enough. But most importantly, I keep a pulse check on my sales leaders' feedback on a weekly basis, which is a little bit more qualitative. And I also look at the supporting metrics, which are often tied to specific channels. And RP, you can click through all of this, it's fine. I have to admit, sometimes I can get quite caught up in the metrics. I get overly fixated on the channels. And so I end up focusing on churning out activities within the channels. And the reports I start making, start to talk about channels. And I think the reason why I sometimes make that mistake of focusing on channels is because it's what sales understands. If I try explaining to them, oh, this end-to-end campaign, the psychology behind it, the econometrics of it, and how it all ties together, I know it's not quite going to stick. But the moment I say we have 3 events or webinars in every single priority market, they're happy, okay? I mean, your sales might think differently. So then my marketing ends up getting diluted and just channel-centric rather than around the buyer journey, and whether are we having enough different touch points? Is the tagline and the messaging what I can carry on beyond just a one-off event? It's so much easier sometimes to show them I have 100+ contacts from a physical event or webinar. And I'm not saying it's bad, it's okay to do that. I just think as marketers, we have one of the busiest jobs around. And so the second lesson for me is to always stop and ask myself, is my creative content and influencers any good? If they aren't good, what I push out will just be an average experience. Maybe I'll get some okay numbers, but the ultimate conversion and the KPI of active opportunity pipeline for sales, both in the short term and in the long term, will be low. And that's just what I've observed from my own personal experience. So beyond just the metrics and the KPIs, I have to keep asking myself, have I thought through the user journey? Have I created enough meaningful experiences through different channels? Am I simply just pushing bottom of the funnel activities? Have I forgotten about my top of the funnel? Or have I focused too much on top of the funnel and I forgot to connect them back to the middle and the bottom of the funnel? And on to the third and final lesson. At Backbase, we talk about having 2-speed architecture to help banks in their digital banking transformation. And that's the same for marketing. We need to have 2 speeds. 1, keep the engine running. The short term, the fast sales activation tactics and digital ads, as I said before, give sales and even marketing a sense of immediacy, a sense of achievement, right? Every time you see those numbers, you feel like, oh, that's fantastic. You have to keep that engine running. For example, during COVID-19, I spoke earlier about the digital ads becoming very expensive and my cost per lead going through the roof. And most of us, including myself, were asked to cut a significant amount of our advertising budgets. My peers would cut about 50%. Some would even stop advertising entirely, which is logical. But I decided to only drop it marginally by about 20% plus. Even though I knew my cost per lead would be high. I was willing to swallow that cost because I knew I was going to get pressure from sales asking for MQLs and new contacts, even though we have a pandemic. And you don't want to be in a place where you have 0 or just 1 or 2 MQLs coming in. And it's actually the best time to gain share of voice at a time when everybody is cutting budgets and getting distracted by other things. The second speed is to build your creative muscles by investing in mid to long-term projects that will give you reach, especially in branding and email marketing, because you're not just investing in buyers today, you're investing in future buyers and those in their circle of influence as well. I'll share another story with you. In one of my previous jobs, I had a regional CMO who only wanted to see video stories, video interviews, out of office, out of home ads at airports and brand related activities. If I invested time or budget in trade shows or booths or webinars or email marketing, she didn't consider them strategic. She would tell me, Davinia, don't spend too much time on that. The problem I had was that every quarter we had to report our numbers to the global CMO who wanted to see events, who wanted to see webinars, emails, hard numbers on our marketing source and influence opportunities. And she considered videos and branding as non-strategic, as delivering no ROI. So you can imagine how stuck I felt, right? What do you do, And the reality is you have to do both. But be very careful to pick and choose the activities you know will make an impact and that you can achieve without killing yourself. The mistake I made back then was I was, doing too much. I was a people pleaser, right? And in the end, most of the experience and initiatives I delivered felt average and a bit diluted. And so here's my final slide. If content is king, which you hear a lot, but what you don't hear is that context is God, right? And that's the same for KPIs. They mean nothing without context, and the data means nothing without analysis. And sometimes you can have the best content, it creates great engagement and MQLs, but the timing, the context is just not in your favor. Just like COVID-19 situation that we're in right now. And sales and marketing just need to have a very open and honest conversation to adjust our expectations going forward. So while all the KPIs and metrics I talked about can be helpful, the best recipe is really your own judgment, combining your own judgment with the data and analysis that you have, and spending enough time with your target audience and sales to understand their interests and needs, understanding the context around you. And as you consume more information from various sources, as you spend more time keeping in touch with your customers, you'll eventually, trust me, you'll eventually be able to take all these different parts and bring it into focus and perform beyond just the numbers. So that's it for my session, and thank you.
Thank you, RP. And I'm, a little bit of nostalgia. I'm remembering, last year, Taj Lands End, Bombay, when I did the keynote for you at your content summit. And what interesting times, and we could not have anticipated that, we would be doing this. Well, let me take on from where Davinia left off, and Davinia, thank you for covering two things which are, dear to my heart also. One is you spoke about what gets measured gets managed. I like to say what gets measured gets done, because ultimately, my job as a CMO is to get it done, So I like to say it like that. And the second thing is very interesting that you mentioned the quandary that you had where your global CMO wanted the numbers and your CMO wanted the strategic stuff, and you're so right in pointing out that both need to get done. And I think so RP, let me just start from there and say that I think this is a very interesting time for somebody like me who started her career 27 years ago. And first 10 years 11 years of my career till about 2006 2007, we all lived for the so-called strategic stuff. If you were in marketing, you did brand and you did communication and you did advertising, and you did all of that. you had not heard the word internet and digital and social media. That really happened, around 2005, 2006 in India, really. That was the time I also delivered my son. So I always equate it to that, and I say that, it's almost, for me, it's like before my son and after my son. Okay. So, and that's when I say that the performance marketing as a discipline really came into marketing. And I personally think it's a great thing to happen to marketers, because now you have a seat on the table. Now marketing is no longer about, non KPIs, some brand health monitor, things will happen, may not happen, right? And a lot of us moved from being FMCG purebred marketers into financial services or telecom, like I've done. And now I'm with technology and I've done hospitality, right? And in these spaces, which is what I call service industry, it's these metrics and KPIs that have taken over in terms of marketing proving its worth to the business. And I have been in brands where the performance budgets have been far, far bigger and higher than the brand budgets. So I'm definitely not making a statement about IBM. I'm going to keep quiet about that, but I'm talking about the brands that I worked upon, previously. And that is also, interestingly, we must consider the fact that FMCG marketers still don't do it like that, because that structure of the business is so that they are far, far away from cost per lead, cost per sale, what SEO is, what SEM is. The FMCG marketers still look at doing the ad and still delivering on brand health scores, because impulse purchases, wallet shares over there get managed like that. Now, I think the discussion today and the question that you raised with us is what happened to us in the last few months. Okay, I have a contrary point of view to Davinia, though. Okay, I feel that there are no new metrics, or rather, to you, your intro also, RP, that you said. I feel that no new metrics have entered my life. And no new matrix can enter my life, because I've already got the tools and the stack and the last year comparison and the YTY year to year numbers to look at. But I think what has happened is the benchmarks have changed. Okay, which means that if, for example, my sale used to take 4 months earlier, may be taking much longer today, and especially is happening in the B2B context, right? So the benchmark with which I'm looking at is changing. The question that you're debating is, for example, things like these, and any one of you could be facing this situation, that if I was purging all my leads from my CRM system earlier after 6 months, and they became dated, should I keep them alive for 9 months or 10 months today? I think those are the kind of questions that we are raising, right? If, for example, my delivery from my virtual event or from my event, was X percentage, as a benchmark, right? The expense to, win ratio, as we call it, right? Then that ratio has changed, right? So it is becoming very difficult for us to define what is success. And it is becoming very difficult for us to therefore put my hat onto this thing and say, did I do a good job? Or when I, as a CMO, go back to tell my team, I don't know whether to tell them they did a great job or not, because the numbers will still pan out and I don't have that benchmark. So that's the challenge that I think we're really facing on the KPI. So it's a quandary, clearly, but I'm of the strong belief that no new KPIs have entered my system. It is just the fact that my benchmarks have changed, and I am at sea just now because I don't know what the real benchmark is, or how to compare it. And because the ones which were pre-COVID are probably something we're all taking it with a pinch of salt. So that's a one point I wanted to make. And to me, therefore, and I always like to use words to describe this. So today my mantra in all this is that therefore, what is the agility of your team in accepting new KPIs, not establishing new KPIs, establishing new benchmarks for the KPIs that you've always had, right? And that's the agility that one is looking at. But we always remember, as marketers, we must accept that this agility is not something that we brought in. This agility is something that the customer has brought in. It's the customer's context, customer's behavior, customer's needs that have changed, that have brought about this change in the market. So when I kind of sometimes say that my compass is lost, and I don't know what the benchmark is, I tend to go back to the customer and say, okay, let me look at what's happening over there. And that gives me a sense of whether this benchmark needs to be higher, lower, better, a kind of space. So that's one point I wanted to make. Okay. The second point, and once again, thanks to Davinia for bringing that up, this whole debate between performance marketing and the brand. Okay, the strategic and the numbers need to get done. The sales team wants the leads, and I need to do the thought leadership. This whole debate, that is happening, it will enter the performance marketing and the MarTech and the KPI space also, because today, more than anything else, the content that you're putting out is becoming very, very important. The relevance of that content, the message that you're putting out, right? So, and I'm calling it, going back to the basics, and I'm calling it authenticity of the brand. So earlier, the performance marketers may not have worried so much about, I have these 10 different messages. What am I really talking about? In IBM, for example, we have, so many business units, right? It's not just one business that my team is working on. I have 4 different teams and they work on, 8 different businesses, right? So when that happens, sometimes earlier, this whole how you want to hold tight, and you need to ensure that IBM brand is in there. You want to ensure that people know about what is IBM's authentic voice, and your performance marketing also needs to deliver thought leadership, because if you don't deliver on that, you're not going to be actually being close to your consumer, and the consumer is not listening to you. You need to look at this whole COVID period in terms of during COVID, just when we're coming out of COVID, and the long-term impact of COVID. And therefore, the narrative for the customer, the reference point for what you want to talk to them has to change. And that is becoming a very important part of the whole performance marketing domain, although there is no KPI to measure it. So this is where I think the marketers need to be very conscious that, are you doing this change and bringing the authentic voice of the brand into the market, even though you're responsible for performance marketing and you've never been responsible before, perhaps, for the brand's authentic voice. So I've done 2 messages. One is agility in terms of shifting your benchmarks, and second is authenticity in terms of the messaging that you're doing, even if it is performance marketing, right? And the third thing that comes to play here then is the ability of the marketing team. Okay, so that's the third A. Okay, after agility, authenticity, ability. Okay, and the ability is really about 2 things. Okay, one is the human skills that you have inside your marketing organization. Do you have this kind of people who can manage this chaos, understand the agility, understand that benchmarks have changed? Do you have performance marketers who have sensitivity to brand messaging or not? Because sometimes people can be only just so skilled in one area that they are completely blind to the other. So one is the human skill, and I can't acquire it overnight. Okay, that's this is something that we should have all invested in and thought about earlier, and it's paying off for me, thankfully, because I've always believed that a marketer needs to be complete 360 degrees. I just can't have a person with only one skill set. I encourage people to learn more. The second part of the ability, okay, so one is human skills. The second part of the ability is the marketing stack that you have and the tools that you have. And that, once again, you can't make a sudden investment into a CRM. You can't do an implementation during the COVID period. You should have had the tools in the stack, earlier on. And which is why this, I'm linking back and saying you can't change the KPIs suddenly. You have a stack, you have the tools, you've been measuring the same things, and the reports will come out the same way. You might do a little bit of a massage to understand what the new benchmarks are, but you can't suddenly start looking at the new KPIs. So that's my, in short, slightly contrary point of view, to what RPU said in terms of changing KPIs. I feel the benchmarks are changing, right? So agility, authenticity, and ability of both human skills as well as the tools in the stack that you have will probably see you through this period. And I personally, once again, do think that January 2022, I'm talking 18 months from now, okay? January 2022, I think we will start forgetting, the havoc that COVID has had on our lives. And I know that everybody's just thinking next year. And I know that it's bad news for businesses, because a lot of the small enterprises, medium enterprises may disappear, new business models may emerge. But I think for us to, for marketers, for the people in this room today, for us to really look at, will life go back to normal? I think January 2022, we would start looking at growth, we would start looking at positively at what's coming, and we would start looking at the glass half full. That's what I had to say today, RP.
I just picked up this whole topic, I mean, very formal topic. And I thank you, ladies. Very insightful thoughts. I think both had their real good perspective, and both are right in a way, because all marketers are going through this whole challenge. And interesting, because you went on seeing me nodding my head and yeah, this is right and that is right. So I think both of them are good and very good, insightful points which you guys have shared. I will take a different perspective and different way of looking at this situation, and I will dwell into the KPI perspective. But one of the things I want to do is that take a step back, look at what has happened the past 3 months, right, which has changed the whole world for us, right, as marketers, and not only us, everybody, right. uh, and the key words which we kept on hearing in the media, in the social world, when we are talking to each other, these words were pandemic, new normal, uncertainty, business continuity, and the keyest thing was hashtag cancel 2020, right? And that actually was and we are all talking about it, but something caught my attention, and I would like to share this with you. Some of you would have read about this, read this small write-up from Miss Leslie Dwight, and it says, "What if 2020 is not cancelled?" Right? The words, like, this narrative caught my attention, is that it's a different perspective. When we all are talking about the uncertainties, the pandemics, and things are not going well, there is a new perspective, and I agree to it. And I said, indeed, this is what it is. This is the time for change. And I think 2020 is a real awakening for all of us, marketers, sales, everybody, right? It just actually, this is a very important year for us to create this new revolution, and that's something which we are looking at, and we as marketers needs to brace out, right? um, Adding this and this, setting this context, I want to ask all of you that, what is the B2B thing? Is this familiar with all of us? I mean, Davian said that, Deepa mentioned about it. This is the initial blueprint for any B2B marketer ever, right? Your brand coverage, the inverted funnel, DG, enablement, backbone infrastructure. Do we all have? And everything. Now it depends on each and every market. Some markets, like, companies like IBM has a different movement, and you put importance and dollars to some of the activities because the motion requires something. People like us in McAfee will have a different motion altogether, but the concept remains the same, right? What is our priority? Now, what has happened when we moved from this is a whole structure, to what has changed right now? Things, and pre-COVID, we had this platform of virtual and live, right? Wherein we had the best of both the worlds. But if you see what the live events, or events as such we call it, has got us: great networking, interpersonal skills, captive audience, brand recall, right? And then of course the best of world of reaching out through your awareness campaigns on the digital motion. Davyani was talking about the digital motion. But what suddenly happened, and we had to pivot to no life but to virtual, and it had to happen in 3 months, right? What does that mean is that the best thing which has happened, and I'm keeping this positive and really I believe in that, is that the acceptance of the virtual world. Can you imagine CIOs sitting for an hour to listen to a webinar or a virtual event? Was virtual events not there earlier? Was there no webinars earlier? But we have that acceptance from sales, from channels, and from our customer perspective. The cost effectiveness, if you look at from live to virtual, I think it's very cost effective mode. Now, scalability, I think managing an APAC region, one of the things which definitely comes is, where do I prioritize? How do I prioritize, right? Will I put in awareness? Is this a brand coverage, or is it a demand generation? This actually, the boundary has reduced significantly, right? Because I can at a time understand the target audience and actually talk to a Asia Pac team completely, India, Asia, and ANZ, right? So you are breaking the boundaries, and that is a cost effective thing. And of course, the science of marketing, I think insightful data is something which is powerful. Now here, and Devyani mentioned that, what the thing is that we need to be very careful on this, is that most of our customer base, or most of the companies like us, we had this hybrid posture 2 or 3 years back, right? People who do not have the posture and has to start from scratch is a issue. They have to have a problem. But we, all of us, actually marketing was resilient faster than our counterparts like sales and channels. If you see, we pivoted faster in a virtual world than other people, right? So I think there is a lot of positivity when it comes to the virtual platform. Why I'm saying is that the concept of the objectives remain the same. I think I mean, I think somebody said this again in my previous conversation, was that the concept, what is the objective of B2B? B2B is basically build, grow, and close, right? Now, build, I am building the funnel, and then, for that, we need to have different tactics: grow, go deep dive, and close. It's as simple as that. So the approach right now with the hybrid, it has moved down to a complete leveraging the digital part of it, right? Now here, what is important is basically the strong content. Again, content is the king. You have to have a clear call to action. And also the key thing out here is your relationship with marketing channels and sales integration. That is a secret sauce in this whole journey and the new journey, because everyone needs to be aligned with the whole approach to make this successful. Now, then coming back to the basic question why we are together, is that, do we redefine marketing KPIs? My take is that I don't think so. We need to change, we need to tweak, right? And if you see, three of us in our conversation, we actually believe that we need to tweak. We cannot reinvent. There is nothing to reinvent. We have to generate our MQLs. We have to generate our marketing generated leads. How effectively we generate it is something which is dependent on the content. Earlier, when we utilized content, it was more from awareness, brand building, positioning perspective. Right now, the content is more towards the demand generation perspective, which means that we need to have a clear actionable. If a customer goes, what is he reading? Why? What is the next step a customer needs to do to come and reach out to a company like McAfee? What are the actionables? Are you giving a workshop? Is there a price point? Is there a convenience of a customer to move on to the website and the digital platform to come and communicate? Is something we need to work at. So KPIs needs to be tweaked, because it's no more of number of click-throughs, how many people have opened our emails. That's gone. It is almost like, how many leads have we generated out of this initiative, how many conversations we have said, how many customers have reached out, or how many things sales have reached out to our customers to have that conversation. I think that is something which we need to look at. So in that, I think it's a cliche, though I'm putting this slide, middle of difficulty lies opportunity, but it holds a real good sense for me, because, and what are those opportunities? We have gone beyond events. Each and every marketer in this call, put your hand on your heart, and remember what kind of conversations you would have with sales. It's like, let's do an event. We were the, let's move into digital because there's a crowd. And they're like, no, let's do events. Events is a success rate metrics, right? It becomes a very difficult conversation with them. What does that mean is that the amount of scalability or reach which we're having the customers reduces because of this, right? So with this situation, we have moved beyond events. We are looking at virtual events, summits, and sales channels. They would like to ride the wave. and also the CIOs, CEOs are more keen to join out there and talk to us through this platform. So that's a good news for us. Again, I again emphasize on cost effectiveness, accessibility of the customers. Just imagine today with three of us here with RP setting up this call with all of you at different regions at different times. Would it have been possible, right? It wouldn't have right now if it was not for the digital platform, right? And same thing, if you can do that, and it's a simple example, but same thing, how can we accessible to customer? The customers are right now accessible, they're open to a 6:30 call, or that personal linkage and accessibility has increased a lot. At least I can tell you from my domain of security, I think there is really good accessibility to the customer base. And target marketing and customer insightful data, I think the good news is that we can use the science of marketing. The science of marketing is understanding the target audience, understanding what the person or the customer is reading, and coming up with the complete motion or the programs which we launch for an effective marketing. That was constrained in the live events. It was more of a very manual process. Here it is a zero time, just reset, do an activity, we know what's the data, we can just reach out, give out the call to action. So agility, right? Agility is one of the things we mentioned in the earlier discussions. You become more agile, it's more insightful, more, you can augment the whole proposition what we are doing. So I feel that this situation in the last 3 months has had an added positiveness to all of us. I don't think so we should change the KPIs completely, because KPI, finally, the business is we need funnel generation. The tactics, the mode, the conversation, the content is something we need to look at. And the question which I leave with you guys is that, do you still want to erase 2020, or do you think this is an opportunity and make it big and better? Thank you, RP. Over to you.